Welcome to the Free Library of Philadelphia Online. My name is Jason Freeman, and I'm a producer and editor here in the Free Library's Author Events Office. And I'm pleased to be here to introduce tonight's guest, Don Lemon. America's sole Black primetime news anchor, Don Lemon has hosted CNN Tonight since 2014. Before joining the respected cable network in 2006, he worked for NBC News and MSNBC, and earlier in his career as a reporter and anchor in Birmingham, Philadelphia, and Chicago, among other places, as we were chit-chatting about a little bit earlier. The recipient of an Edward R. Murrow Award and 3 regional Emmy Awards, Mr. Lemon was named one of EBONY magazine's 150 most influential African Americans of 2009 and one of Advocate's 50 most influential LGBTQ people in media in 2014. He is here tonight with his new book, This Is the Fire: What I Say to My Friends About Racism. Drawing on personal experience, informed reporting, and historical research to examine the struggle to end racism in our time, it includes a letter to his nephew, stories of confrontations with activists and politicians, and a visit to the slave port where one of his direct ancestors was cast into bondage and sent to America. One review says that the author, quote, brings a searing power and persuasiveness to his arguments and views. In his eloquence and candor, Lemon is a lyrical and ardent advocate for what is decent, just, and long overdue, end quote. Tonight's author will be in conversation with Tamala Edwards, anchor of 6 ABC Action News Morning Edition, and a great friend of the Free Library, and specifically to us here in the Author Events Office. Bottom line, we're in for a great talk. So let's get to it. Don, Tam, thank you both for being here, and take it away.
All right, thank you, Jason. Hey, Don, how are you?
I'm doing very well. It's so good to see your face. It's so good to see a familiar face throughout these book events I've been doing. Thank you for doing this.
Oh, absolutely. Andy just said, would you? And I said, of course. And I really enjoyed the book. There's a lot to talk about.
Yeah. And he didn't mention like you're the #1 morning show, like throughout, like WABC. I mean, 6 ABC in Philadelphia is like I work there and I know we were always #2 and they were like the powerhouse #1 station. Action News. Dun, 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 dun. You guys still have that theme song?
Well, they'll never let go of that theme song. And I'm going to call you Reverend Lemon because I'd like to say a word about the ladies in the auxiliary and how good they are. That's what you're doing. You've been trained well to say thank you at the start. All right. So, Don, I was reading that you've been working on a book and then the death of George Floyd happened and that got you to thinking about The Fire Next Time with James Baldwin. Tell us what you were working on first and then how it morphed into this.
Well, I've been working on a book, but it was just a couple of years before. And they had asked me to write, someone had asked me to write a book about living well. Because, they're like, Don Lemon, even though all this stuff is happening around you, you appear to be living a happy and whatever life. And so I said, okay, I'll do it. First of all, they wanted me to write a Trump book, a book about, covering the news and being an anchor that was sort of at the matrix of everything during the Trump administration. And I said, I don't want to do that. I don't want to be that closely affiliated to that administration. And also, I'm not a political person. I just happen to, politics just happened to be at the top of the news, right? And we were all consumed by it. But I'm not a political person, so I didn't want to write that book. So I was writing a sort of, live your best life, wellness, that sort of thing. And then I said I didn't want to do it. So I stopped doing that project. And then George Floyd happened. And I said, this is the book that I want to write because I had been so affected by The Fire Next Time, which is one of my original copies that I keep here. Look at this, all beat up with notes and everything that I, had.
As it should be.
And yeah, and then, quotes and lines that I wanted to remember and think about. And so I thought about the Fire Next Time and how powerful, it was just a short, powerful, potent commentary on what was happening at the time. And I said, that is what the type of book I wanted to write. And so we were in the middle of quarantine and I couldn't see my loved ones, touch them, show them any sort of love except through video, conference screen or FaceTime. And, 13, 14-year-old boys don't want to do that.
No,
so usually I
I
hang out with them or go fishing or we go boating or something, or we take them to the bounce house, with all the things where they can do flips and whatever. And so I decided to sit down and start my book with a letter to my great nephew, as James Baldwin had started his Fire Next Time with a letter to his nephew. And that's how it happened.
You know, early in the book, you say change happens, new ideas take root, culture evolves. And yet it feels as though as we go through the book, we're going in two different directions. Have we evolved at all? Or will we just never evolve? And I love the fact that you touch on somebody whom I adore, Chinjerai Kumanika, who people need to listen to Uncivil and seen on the radio. And at one point he said he had to stop going to dinner parties because he just kept saying, everything is 1865. Everything is 1865. And his friends were like, we don't want to hear that anymore.
Yeah.
But as you read this book, you know, there are moments when you feel as though we're moving forward. And then there are moments when you feel as though everything is 1865. We have never moved on. Maybe we never will move on.
Yeah.
How do you balance those two feelings?
Well, I think about people like me and you who I feel have made some progress, and I think about our families as well. And I like to say that, you know, we came out of the W.E.B. Du Bois talented 10th generation, people who really put a premium on education. And they were the strivers, right? Sort of that first generation in and out of the civil rights movement. So I mean, I do see progress from that, but I don't see a lot of progress in thinking. I don't see a lot of progress, quite frankly, with integration. You know, we work together, we see each other, you know, maybe at the mall or bump into each other, and everything is, you know, there aren't colored water fountains anymore. But for the most part, we all sort of live in our own little silos, and we're very polarized. White people hang out with white people, black people hang out with black people. And I think it's just human nature. You know, it's like Beverly Tatum's Why Are All the Black kids sitting together in the cafeteria, right? So that's just sort of happened. But I think that I think people get sort of explicit racism mixed up with the subtle racism, which I think can be even just as potent and just as dangerous because it's stealthy. And so you said, how do I qualify or balance the two? I'm not sure. I don't really have an answer for it. I just sort of live through it and try to keep positive. And the book ends, I hope, that with positivity and on a positive note, as positive as we can get, as we have just, you know, when I finished the book, about to move into a Capitol insurrection. And then now trying to figure out if, you know, what happens with voter restrictions all over the country, voter suppression. So, you know, how do you balance that? I'm not sure. I'm not quite sure, Tam, how a person who doesn't have a platform like you and I do, how you balance that, because I would feel so frustrated. And so that's why every night I think I speak for people, because I feel like a lot of people don't have a platform in this country, and sometimes the wrong people. So I think I balance it just by speaking out on my show.
You know, you brought that up, and given what you sat with, obviously, for some time writing this book, what was it like for you to see the insurrection, and you see the battle flag, and you see the symbolism, you hear some of the words, and it is like being in a time machine.
Yeah.
Just pick a point in history and go right on back.
Yeah, it is. You know, and right, just before the question you asked me about 1865, I remember before during the campaign, the Trump campaign in 2015, 2016. You know, he said people would, Chinjerai said you said Chinjerai would say people would, he would get kicked out of dinner parties, or they would be tired of him saying it's 1865 again. So I remember going to, you know, in Brooklyn, like, you know, all of these like sort of liberal parties, and they would have these, you know, funny images of Donald Trump. Some of them had Donald Trump Christmas ornaments, you know, with hair and whatever. And I would say, you guys are not taking him seriously. Like, he really has a good chance of winning. And none of them believed me. And there was one dinner party in Brooklyn where I got kicked out of it because I was like, yeah. And they're like, no, there's no way he's going to win. And I'm like, yeah, you should not underestimate your opponent. Like, this guy knows how to work the media. And in this environment, the media is everything. And so no one believed me. And then it happened. And then I got a couple calls from people saying, you know, you predicted this, like, what happened? And I said, you guys did not take him seriously. And, you know, and you didn't realize who your allies were. You were shouting down your allies, blah, 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 blah. So anyway, long story short, yeah, I feel like it's 1865 all over again. And when I first saw the insurrection, I said, well, that's what I write about in the book. When I write about the bigger dog from the park, from the Coopers, when I said, if we don't deal with this in a substantial way, meaning racism, that someday someone's going to come back with a bigger dog of racism. And so that was that. First, it was Kristen and Amy Cooper in the park, her calling the cops on a Black man because he asked her to put her dog on a leash. Then it was the election was stolen. That was the bigger dog. And the bigger dog after that was the insurrection on Capitol Hill. So what's the next one? I don't know. But unless we deal with it, there's going to be a bigger dog. There's going to be something worse than a Capitol insurrection.
What I'm taking from that is that Chris Rock and Dave Chappelle should have included you in the Saturday Night Live skit.
Right after?
When they said that we knew.
It's true, though. I was sitting there saying, you guys know. But listen, you guys didn't realize how bad racism was. I mean, maybe a lot of us thought, and I write about that in the book, though, when I talk about, I'll let you get to it if you want to, about Trump being the president that we deserved. And so that's how I felt during the election, like, hey, guys, because I would hear people, Tam, saying, I'd be on the elevator or in a hallway in a hotel or wherever after I'd done a town hall or a presidential debate or something, and they'd say, you know what? I like that Trump guy, and they wouldn't say it publicly. And the last time I'd heard people do that was Barack Obama, because there was this sort of energy about him, about Obama, and there was a similar energy about Trump. And I said, people are underestimating this man. And sure enough, I should have been in that skit after the election.
I'm actually going to jump ahead to a question that I was going to get to later, because this whole people feeling free to say what they really mean touches on something else that you talk about in the book, which is cancel culture. And you say, I don't like it as a freedom of speech issue. But you say also, we need to look at things clearly. Don't take the reference out of the book. Don't get rid of the movie. Let's look at it and talk about it. Yeah. But, and in fact, as I was thinking about what you said, I was thinking about Alexi McCammon and the whole blow up at Teen Vogue. She apologized, but it wasn't good enough. Your thoughts on this whole miasma of people feeling free to say what they really mean. When you get caught out there and you apologize, is it enough? What turns the corner and makes the difference? Because I think somebody reading your book might say, I'm almost afraid to approach the material because I know people are going to find some stuff on me. And I don't think anything I say is going to make it better. So I want to stay in this, let's just act like it didn't happen place.
Yeah.
So I wanted your thoughts on all of that, Don.
Oh, wow. That's a big question, Tam.
That is a big question.
So here's how I feel about number one. I'll take it one element at a time. Alexi McCammon, I think, got a raw deal. I haven't said that publicly at all. So there's your exclusive.
Why?
Not that I agree with anything she said or did, but teenagers are teenagers. And if you have kids, you realize that teenagers are teenagers and they make mistakes and they say and do things that later on they regret. That's what maturity, that's what we mean by maturity. And so I think young people in some way should be given a pass for silly things that they say. If it is, something that is sustained and it continues over time, I think it's fine. But I think that that's a different story. But I think that, there are my dogs, if you can hear them.
It's okay.
I think that each thing should be judged on individual merits. So I do believe that Alexi McCammon, she apologized, she said and did all the right things, much as the woman on The Bachelor did the same thing, Rachel Kirkconnell. I think that she apologized, she gets it, it appears to get it. And I think if you do the work, you apologize, and then people see you making up for it or doing the right thing, there's no reason to be canceled. America's about restitution, right? That's quite frankly what our criminal justice system is supposed to be about. People making restitution and as we say in the book, making what's the thing for your sins, restitution for your sins. So I think that, I don't think people should be canceled. Now, I will say there has to be accountability. And I think people can be held accountable. And I think sometimes the process, the scrutiny that they go through is the accountability. And that doesn't mean that they should be fired. I think that if you say or do something that deserves apologizing for, or that is offensive to someone, sometimes the scrutiny you get is then you realize that, oof, I screwed up. And you have to go through that pain and you have to go through the criticism. So we should not be treating everything with like a one size fits all sort of thing. Everything is not a 4-alarm fire that you have to get rid of people for. There are degrees. And I think everything should be judged on its own merit. But I don't believe in canceling people. I quite frankly don't believe in firing people for making those kinds of mistakes. I do believe that we have to start letting people be human. Human beings are fallible. They're not perfect. They're not robots. And guess what? Perfection is boring. That's how I feel.
At one point in the book, you say, Black brothers and sisters, we must swallow our righteous wrath, making it clear that we will do our best to forgive, though we dare not forget. And,
Can you hold on one second? I want to make sure I get it. But I also think you cannot use the quote unquote cancel culture, which I hate those little catchphrases. You cannot use that to be as freedom to say and do anything you want, bigoted or racist or misogynist or homophobic or any sort of thing like that. Some people just want to be able to say what they want and be bigots and racist and offensive without paying the consequences. And I don't believe that you should be allowed to do that. People should be allowed freedom of speech, but you should also suffer the consequences if you say something that is horrible. Sorry.
So there's a difference between I get it, I got it right, not doing it again.
Right.
And I did it. Yeah, I did it. And I'm going to keep doing it.
And
what you going to do about it?
Yeah, what you going to do about it? Well, we don't have to watch you on TV. We don't have to buy your product. We don't have to. That's also freedom of expression. There's freedom of speech and there's freedom of expression. And your fellow Americans are free to express themselves just as you are free to say whatever you want. Sorry to cut you off.
No, it's okay. I was asking you about what to do with the wrath, because you said we have to swallow it, say we will forgive, but not forget. Right. And I think I read that the same week an editor in the newsroom said to me, for some reason they were talking about Dylan Roof and the church forgiving him. And they said something to me about, would you forgive? And I said, no, take me out of it, because I haven't forgiven him. And that one stayed with me, that line between, for many Black people, I think they feel as though this is the first time they've been able to truly express that wrath. Mm-hmm. And they don't want to move to forgiveness so fast. They want people to hear and understand that wrath.
Yeah. And in your own time. And is it up to you, quite frankly, Tam, to forgive Dylan Roof? I think it's up to his family. I mean, their families to forgive Dylan Roof. I haven't forgiven Dylan Roof. And again, I think it's one of those things where you do it in your own time. Eventually, whether you forgive Dylan Roof or not, you're going to have to come to terms with what he did, because that's a reality. He did what he did. And I think that Dylan Roof is the extreme example of what happens when you don't, what happens when you live the lie of racism, and when you live the lie, quite frankly, of history, the history that's taught in this country, which is a history of white supremacy. And I think he was living that lie and was co-opted by the lie. And so are many people, including the Capitol insurrectionists and the people who marched in Charlottesville. A lot of racist, neo-Nazis, and, sort of your everyday extremists, if you could say that, if that's a term, are living that sort of lie here in America. So again, individually, people can decide, but that doesn't mean that you can lose your passion about something. That doesn't mean that you have to compromise your values or your morals, because forgiveness really is usually about you and not about the other person. It's a way of releasing the burden that you feel about a situation so that you can move on and be whole. And it's not about making the other person feel better, because that other person has to suffer their sins. But sometimes I think forgiveness is about releasing yourself from the burden of whatever it is that you feel about that, as much as you can release that.
A lot of this moment right now is definitely colored by the technology. 10 years ago, you would have heard a story. Today, somebody posted on Facebook and you can see it in real time. And with shocking regularity, we see these videos, we see these stories posted. And you talked about that because you're right, because when Black lives truly do matter in macrocosm, we won't have to hold up Black deaths to prove it. At what point does desensitization kick in? That second part comes, a paragraph away. But I found myself thinking about that. You have to watch the video because of what you do. But I wondered, if you weren't Don Lemon with a talk show every night, at this point, would you watch the videos when they pop up on Facebook?
It depends on what it is. Yes. And I think people watch. I know we both have our water here, right?
You may have water.
You got lemonade. Oh, what's that? Is that a little vodka?
I saw your New Year's show.
No. Well, this is all water. It's just lemon water. I think I would, because every time I see something like that, I can't believe it. I'm like, oh my God, this happened. But I don't know if I was an average citizen. I have no idea. But I do think that that's why it's on social media so much, is because people see it and they watch it and they become outraged by it. But I think that as I write in the book, you know, that's a chapter where we talk about when will Black people cease to have to hold up Black deaths as martyrs, right? In order to fix the issue of racism in this country. I think George Floyd was different. I think that, you know, it wasn't the first time that we saw Black death on television, but we were in the middle of quarantine, in the middle of a deadly pandemic, and no one knew what the world was going to look like from minute to minute to minute, if they were going to be alive, if they were going to catch a deadly virus, if their family was. And I think seeing that particular event on television over and over and over really had a profound effect on people, because we were all open and vulnerable, right? We didn't know where we were going. And every time you saw that video, whether it was on the news or on a blog or whatever, I know people would just scream at it like it was happening then. Like, that's enough, take your knee off. And you knew he didn't, because a guy died, George Floyd died. But you would just scream at that video like, okay, already, that's enough. Like, you're robbing the guy of his right to God-given right to breathe. Like, okay, take your knee off. Like, and so I think it really affected people in a way that was undeniable, that these things happen. That there it is right in front of your face. But would I watch it? Probably yes, I would.
Later, at this point, it's hard to say, because you almost feel as though you owe it to the dead to bear witness and to hold up their name. But, you know, as you get into in the book, you'd like to see Black movies and Black art that hold up so much more, that aren't always Black trauma.
Right.
And I feel as though we are so often left to stand in the place of trauma, and we're whipsawed by it all. We want to bear witness. We want to tell the history. We want there to be an accounting, but we also know that the weight stays with us differently than everybody else, that we watch that video repeatedly and it's like a stone on our back, while other people may not make it past 30 seconds.
Yeah. But it's also, and we feel it in a more profound way, especially men of color, because I watched it with pride as I write in the book. And in that I saw my great nephews, my cousins, you know, I don't have a brother, but we all saw our brother, our sons, our husbands, our uncles in that video, and it could have been any one of us. And so just watching it over and over, you're right. I think it's like a collective burden that we have, like, there, but for the grace of God go I, and all of that, the pain body, as Eckhart Tolle talks about, it all sort of comes out. It all came out in us as people of color. And I think we screamed inwardly and outwardly, like, there it is. There's that pain. And so, but I don't know how much longer we're going to have to do it. I think it's going to be a while until people actually get it, until people, you know, as I write in the very beginning, the complacency returns. Until the complacency stops returning, we're going to have to do it. What do
you think the outcome of the trial will be? You started the book writing with the video, and you know, on your show, you're going to spend at least a week talking about the outcome.
Or more, depending on the outcome. If the outcome is in favor of the police officer, you know, God help us, what happens in the country. Because you know, you saw what happened in the summer of 2020. Now imagine if all of that rage and pain and fear and vulnerability and everything that we felt in that moment, the sorrow, the sadness, and not just Black people, but the entire world. Imagine feeling like there was no justice for that. There is no justice for a man whose life was snuffed out of him in front of the world to see. And all of these huge protests happened around the country when we had an awful person as president, and then the person who gassed peaceful protesters in front of the White House. Imagine all of that rage coming out. I don't want to even think about what could happen in this country. If there is a satisfying, and I say satisfying, verdict for his family and for the public, I think that could help to lead to some change. I think either way will lead to change, but one will be change with rage and unrest, and the other one will be change for people realizing, okay, the one will be a hopeful sort of change, a more positive way of changing, more positive ways.
Changing. You lace the book with a lot of personal stories of growing up, of your family, of other aspects of your life. And one of the stories that you include is that you've had DNA done, testing done, or family stories handed down. Like many African Americans, you have slave ancestors and white ancestors, including your, am I saying it correct, Mame?
Mommy.
Mami. Her parents turn out to be a white father, black mother who loved each other and loved her.
Yeah.
Did it mean something to you that in that heritage was not just the story that we were used to of subjugation and pain and torture, but of two people in this system who did love each other?
Yeah. Yes, it was. And what was so, there was heartening, there were things that were heartening and disheartening about it. What was so heartening is that they loved each other and they wanted to be together. It was disheartening that they couldn't. And the stories that were told to us and in most accounts backed up from the newspaper, because the newspaper reported his death as he shot himself in the head or what have you, and died very early on. I think it was 55, 56 years old. It was that they loved each other, but society just wouldn't let them be together. And they loved each other, and they had a child together, and he wanted to do right by that child, but he just couldn't because of the world. And he ended up buying, property in a house and trying to take care of her in a way that he could. But again, the person he loved, he couldn't be with him. And so can you imagine, that sort of resonated with me as a person who happens to be gay. If you can't be with the person you love, how awful that feels, the trauma it causes, I guess a psychosis in a certain sense. I think it would drive me into therapy, and I'm not sure how that would, come out in my spirit and in my soul and in my actions. Not being able for sustained time, decades, to be able to be with the person you love and show affection, that would be awful.
Before we came on, we were talking a little, you said, how's Philly? And I told you, Philly's having some stuff go on. Duck seems to be the watchword for so many people.
Wow.
And so many corners of the city. We continue, we're still the nation's poorest large city. A lot of people trapped in these situations. And you write a lot about policing and restorative justice, that you say it's justice that we should be after, not defunding the police. And I wondered, what does that mean, justice, in a place like this where, there is deep mistrust between the police and the people, where there is an epidemic of gun violence, where the assailants and the victims are increasingly children, 15, 16 years old. How does that actually get implemented? What does it look like to move beyond words and be a thing?
Well, I write about what Ras Baraka is doing in Newark and how he is overhauling the police department. And then I do touch on, I think, San Francisco and some other departments that have done, that have tried to overhaul their police departments. And I think Newark is doing a good job of it. The one thing I will say is that I think what we do is we use policing, or we look at policing as another one size fits all sort of thing, where police do everything from mental health checks to, people call the cops, or 911, the cops show up when a woman is delivering a baby, or when there is a domestic violence in the home. And many of those things police officers, quite frankly, are not equipped to do. And it's not fair for them as well, because imagine that you had a job where you had to take care of every sort of ill. So I think that it can be a tough position to put police officers in, but at the very end, at the very base of it, police officers are trained to de-escalate situations. And no encounter, pretty much, unless someone is writing you a ticket because you did everything right. That doesn't happen with police departments. That most people don't have positive interactions with police. It's usually the police officers pulling you over for something that you did, or they're breaking up some sort of confrontation or something. So it's never really a positive situation. So I don't understand why people, when in an encounter with a police officer, they expect it to be, all roses and sugar and sweetness and love, because that's just, quite frankly, not the nature of policing. So I do think, as I write in the book, I don't like the defund slogan. I think it turns people off. I think it gives the people who are, your opponent, ammunition to criticize you for wanting to take away, because how it translates to them is, you want to take away all police, you want to take the money away from police, you don't respect police. And it's quite the opposite. I think that people who want to reimagine and we do need to reimagine and rethink policing in this country. I think the people who want to reimagine policing, I think it's a good thing, and it's actually positive for police. And I actually think it's a very conservative value if you're actually a Republican, to want to have the right kind of person handling the right kind of situation on the street, and not put police in positions that they're not qualified or trained to do. That said, you can't have people killing people, right? And I think that goes back to the very beginning of the book, or just what I believe is that relationships you must have, and what you asked me about my grandparents and my great-grandparents, is that you must have relationships with people. And that's the only way we're going to fix this, is if we get to know each other and see each other's humanity. And police officers need to see the humanity in the people that they're policing. They should be peace officers and not occupiers.
And speaking of moving forward, and I know this has been a topic on your show, everyone trying to figure out, can you look back and come up with a price tag or some sort of settlement, or what are you to do? And I actually wanted to read this section. Yeah, I wanted to read this section of the book. There is no paying this back. It's been paid forward in the form of, it has to be paid forward in the form of economic opportunity, education, housing, healthcare, and other financial considerations. And you talk about the way that people pay every day with insurance, mortgages, and incarceration. And if people dig into those materials, they will see there is a differential that exerts a tax every day. Instead of the familiar refrain of Black people lobbying for reparations, I'd like to hear some sort of settlement offer from those who now inhabit the empires built on that mountain of ill-gotten cash. In the corners of my book, I wrote, what does that mean? What does that settlement look like?
Well, in the beginning of the book, I say I don't know all the answers, and I'm not an expert on a lot of this, but it depends. I don't know what that settlement looks like. I don't think it looks like cash, because then how do you distribute it? How you give it out? And I do some mathematics in there and show you, right, how much slaves or people of African descent, how much, if you look at it in terms of now, how much they've contributed to a society. But where do you give that to? Who do you give that to? How do you distribute it? And that's something that politicians, I think, should study, because I don't personally think it's in the form of just handing somebody cash, but maybe they'll come up with that, and we'll figure it out. But I think the way that you do that, you have to, I believe everything, the cure for everything is truth. And so if people realize, if you can put some sort of determinative number on it, and then do it through economics, meaning contributing to education, and incentivizing companies to truly be diverse, to hire diverse people, and to put people in positions of management who are diverse, and specifically Black people, I think we can get close to it. And I also think that you're going to have to teach the real history of this country in schools, starting from the very beginning. And you're going to have to tell people that our history in this country, that a lot of people were denigrated in that history and left out, and a lot of people were elevated in that history, and a lot of it is not true. And so we're going to have to start kids learning that early on. That will help change, I think, the psyche in this country and the realization of exactly what our country was and how it started. And that's not a bad thing. This country was built from slaves who came over before the Mayflower. Why shouldn't kids know about that? Why do we elevate people who came over from the Mayflower as if they're some sort of heroes in our society who, are completely deserving of the American dream like no one else? Well, my ancestors came over on the Mayflower. Why isn't it just as prideful that my ancestors came over on a slave ship? Because we both built the country, some of us for free. Perhaps the one who came over on the slave ship may deserve a little bit more elevation than the person who came over and was part of the conquering class.
Can you imagine us getting to that point, Don? I mean, at one point, just think about the things that are going on in the news today. The president was back on TV saying the election was stolen.
The former president.
Yes, thank you. Okay. The election was stolen. We have people trying to put up every bill they can to stop voting. We continue to have all of these divides on the issues. Tom Cotton himself would rather be pulled apart than to do a modicum of what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Do we stay in this moment? Is this it? We just keep fighting this fight for the next 10 years? Or could you imagine that all the stuff people can easily go get in a podcast actually shows up in a history book?
I think we're going to have to make that happen. mean, people don't want to lose power and position and authority and preeminence in a society or any culture, any environment. People fight tooth and nail to keep that. And I think that's what's happening now. I think we're in the, especially because of the demographics of the country, about 2040, 2045 are going to be a majority country. And that's what those people are afraid of. That's what they're scared of. That's what the politicians are. And politicians are using that as a wedge, that fear, right, to hang on to power. You better keep me in power because I'm going to fight for your rights as a traditional holder of power in this society. And that happens to be through white grievance. And so I do think that we can get to that, but we can't be splintered. The right thinking people, not conservative right, but the people who are thinking correctly, who are looking to move the country towards a more perfect union, those people have to stick together and do what they did in November, the 82 million of them. They have to continue to fight for that more perfect union and not to go backwards to a place where marginalized people don't have the same rights as the majority culture in this country. It can't happen. So I do think we can do it, but we're at the precipice right now. That's why I say, quite honestly, this is the fire. And if we don't put the fire out now, again, that bigger dog, or I don't know what is going to be next. Maybe it's going to be a nuclear explosion, but something is going bigger. And I don't know what gives. Is it going to be martial law? Is it going to be people walking the streets with,
two countries?
Yeah. Is it going to be two countries? And I think we're in the middle of a cold civil war right now. Carl Bernstein always says it on our air. And I think it could get worse unless we are at a moment now where we can really fix it, where we can really make a dent. And I think that the events of last summer, the election, where the current administration is taking our country, can really make a huge difference as to if we go in the right direction or the wrong direction. This is
late in the book, you have a graph where I was like, he called everybody out in the space of like 4 sentences. And you say this, it's time we exit the oppression Olympics and get over whataboutism. I'm like, nobody's left standing at the end of that sentence. You remind everybody that white women were chattel for thousands of years before people turned their attention to slavery, and that gay men for hundreds of years faced a certain treatment. And I wanted you to talk about crafting that graph and what you were trying to say to everybody there.
What I was trying to say to everyone is that everyone can have a grievance. There is no greater grievance, I believe, in this country than Black people and Native Americans, right? There's no greater group that's been discriminated against more than that. And so, but then discrimination is discrimination, and it feels awful in the moment for every single person. So whether your ancestor came over on a slave ship, or whether you're a woman who was not able to vote, or whether you're an Asian American who's suffering fear and racism in this particular day and age, or whether you're a Native American whose land was taken away from you, and then you're marginalized in your own communities, that all of that discrimination to the person who, whatever skin they're housed in, whatever person they're housed in, it all feels terrible. And so saying, well, we were discriminated against people the most. Okay, so Black Americans face a lot of discrimination. But look at what's happening with our Asian brothers and sisters right now. They can't even leave their houses because they're afraid of their physical being attacked, right? And their lives taken away from them. When you look at the poverty in Native American communities and on reservations and those sorts of things, it's hard to even, for them many times, to find a meal, right? Or to make ends meet. They don't own property or what have you. So I think, as I say, right thinking people coming together, because we're at that precipice now, instead of having an oppression Olympics, why don't we have people who are marginalized come together and form a union? Because then, in greater numbers, you can help defeat the people who want us to go back to a time when marginalized people did not have the same rights, equity, equality as other people. And that includes women. If you're a woman in this society, you understand how that feels. Thus the Me Too movement, which women are having a Me Too movement right now. It feels awful for the power structure to feel that you are being discriminated by the power structure in this company, in this country, and that men have this power over you in business and they can wield it the way they want. All of that feels awful. And so instead of us fighting against each other saying mine was greater than yours and what about me, what about me, what about me? Yes, of course, what about me? But what about us together collectively? Wouldn't that be a better place to be in, so to make sure that in the future, going forward, that we all have equality and equity, and then we can figure out in that space, rather than a space of division, which is what the other side is trying to do, divide and conquer.
There's a quote from Toni Morrison that I love because it helps you, because you were saying, you know, Don, how do you remain so hopeful and so optimistic? But she says, you know, the purpose of racism is to exhaust you so you can't do anything else.
Amen.
And it just takes up all of your time, your focus, your thoughts. How do you contain it, especially when so much of your work existence is to see it and talk about it, deal with it, think about it, feel it, call it out? So then how do you hold on to your joy and not get consumed by it?
Here's my quote. So James Baldwin says, to accept one's past, one's history is not the same things as drowning in it. An invented past can never be used. It cracks and crumbles under the pressure of life like clay in a season of drought. So I've come to terms with my history. I've come to terms that my ancestors were slaves. I've come to terms that I face greater discrimination in this society. It doesn't mean that I accept that this is my fate and this is where I'll be forever, but it means that I have to accept that this is a reality. And how do I move forward in that reality? And how do I bring my brothers and sisters of all ethnicities along who want to continue towards that more perfect union, towards the greater good? So, you know, one of my dear friends, Chris Cuomo, his ancestors came over as Italians and were discriminated against. But now, and he will tell you, he'll tell you, we're not Italian anymore, we're just white. He'll tell you that himself. He goes, my dad would be upset with you because when my dad was alive, he said, you know, we were, you know, part of the discriminated class and people didn't see us as white. Now we're white, so we evolved. So I think that, again, you must know the history of where you came from. I just believe in that truth. I believe if you start operating from a place of truth, that you don't end up with being easily co-opted by the election was stolen lie. You don't end up being easily co-opted to go run to the Capitol on an insurrection from a lie, because you live in reality. And just think about it. If you actually thought all of those things were true, you might end up at the Capitol as well, simply because you thought it was true. It's a lie. So if you think about all the things that were written about in history books, American history books, from, you know, elementary education on up, if you actually believe in those things, which really promotes a white supremacist history, right? A whitewashed history is a better way of putting it, then you would believe all those things as well. And you would believe that you're the preeminent voice and you have the greater rights among anyone in this country, and this country should be formed in your image. So why wouldn't you, if that's what you're being told over and over and over, then why wouldn't you believe it?
Good point. I'm going to bring in some questions that the crowd has sent through. And the first one is, what role do you think the media has in helping heal the racial divide? I immediately think, is that our job? I think it's our job to report on if everybody else is healing the racial divide.
Yeah, it is our job to report on it if everybody else is healing the racial divide. But you also have to remember within that, that's because we work in legacy media that is supposed to be here, this side, this side, this side. But there are journalists who are advocates who can operate in that space to try to figure out how to heal the divide. There were many people and artists as well, so that's a different story. But there were people who worked as journalists in prior generations who helped to heal the racial divide and who wrote about healing the racial divide. We just seem, I think people want to put media in a position where it can sort of categorize and criticize, because it is media's function to reflect back to society what society is. And sometimes in that reflecting back to society is also a healing, is what it would look like if society moved along in a better direction or in a direction towards a greater good. So I think, yeah, media can be all of that. Traditional, objective journalists, okay, fine, write your traditional or, broadcast your traditional objective journalism stories. But journalists, activists, I don't see any reason why they should not be able to figure out a better way for us.
Somebody asked, you seem much more confident and comfortable in expressing your points of view than ever before. Do you agree? And if so, is it because you've been open about your sexuality and your views about and experiences with racism? Has being free freed you up to be free in every realm, in every
Free,
way?
being free, yes, has freed me up to be free in every way, which means emancipated. I always say I'm a completely emancipated person. I say, and also, I'm over 50, so
You don't care. You
I
have zero, you know what's to give.
I don't care. No, it's true. And I just turned double nickels a couple weeks ago, 55. And I have not been happier, haven't been more I've always felt self-possessed. But it was so weird. I was like walking through today. I had to travel for something, and I was like, what is this feeling? It's so weird, Tam. And I said, this feeling is that I'm happy. And because I hadn't for such a long time felt that way because of the toxicity of the last administration. There was such a weight that was put on journalism because of the attacking of institutions, the racism that came from this administration, the sexism, all of it. And me every single night for 2 hours, can you imagine being at the Matrix, having to report all of this negativity and then still having a target on your back, so to speak, from this administration. And so I started feeling this after the election, like, oh, when they say I'm gonna lay my burdens down by the riverside. And so the weight started to lift, right? And then now I was like, what is this weird? And I said, you know what? I almost felt guilty about it. And I said, I'm not gonna feel guilty. I feel happy. I feel like I should be living my life. So yeah, I feel free. I'm 55 years old. I have a platform that not many people have. And I have a perspective and a point of view, and quite frankly, a lens. I come at this as a gay Black man, an American from Louisiana. And I am just as deserving of the opportunity to be able to say what I want, state my point of view, of anybody else in this medium, anybody on the conservative channels, anybody else who speaks and who has aligned themselves with presidents and have gotten on stages with Donald Trump and whatever, and every single night they say what they want, and then they criticize me for saying what I want because they feel that I should not have that opportunity and I should not have this platform. Well, no. So yes, I am just as deserving to be able to say exactly what I want, tell you how I feel, but guess what I'm gonna do? I'm gonna operate from a place of truth and responsibility, and I'm not going to lie to people. I'm not going to try to co-opt them so that I can stay in power. I'm going to state the truth, regardless if my ratings go up or down. I'm going to tell you the truth because that is my job. That's what I'm tasked to do as a journalist. And that is my responsibility as, quite frankly, a responsible American who cares about my countrymen.
Somebody asked, what keeps you up at night when you're thinking about the midterm election, or God forbid, when you're thinking about the next presidential election? Do you worry about a resurgent populist strongman type candidate, or do you have a glimmer of hope that we're moving in a saner electoral direction?
I do worry, and I worry. This is why I worry, because people often are active and engaged in a national election. They feel they've got to get out and they've got to vote for the president of the United States every 4 years, and that's their responsibility as citizens of the United States. But what they must do is be involved in their local government as well, what their local legislators are doing, the city council, the people who are trying to pass the laws for voter suppression. I am extremely concerned about voter suppression in this country. Look at the 253 or so bills that have been going on from states and that are being implemented in many places from states all over the country of voting rights being restricted. People of color and poor people's voting rights being restricted. It doesn't affect the wealthy people. It doesn't affect the people who have means. It doesn't, quite frankly, affect most of the white people in this country, but it affects a lot of Black folks. Getting rid of souls to the poll or Sunday voting, that's something that is invented by Black people to get them to vote because they were restricted for such a long time from voting. And so you would go to church on a Sunday and they'd say, okay, now we're going to vote, everybody. And the other side the Republicans don't want people of color to have access to the voting booth. That's just plain old discrimination. Why do you think they're doing that? They're doing it because what they're selling, nobody's buying. And they realize if they don't do that, they're not going to win anymore. So are you going to allow your vote to be taken away from you because you're not engaged, because you think like there's no way it's going to do that. And then you wake up on a Sunday morning to go to put your hat on and go souls to the polls. And they're like, oh, sorry, Miss Johnson, you can't vote today. They stopped that. That keeps me up at night because then that populist cult of personality person has more of an opportunity to win again.
Somebody who's at a major Philadelphia hospital, I think essentially what they're getting at is how can a person without a social platform peacefully continue to educate the people in our communities and personal lives? Essentially, I think what they're getting at is this is not an easy conversation, especially when you're not as comfortable as you are just saying it how you feel. What is your advice to somebody else to keep having what can be awkward and uncomfortable conversations? Your publicist loves you.
Seriously, I'm not kidding. Buy this book. It'll help you because I think it gives you practical. First of all, it gives you knowledge. It tells you about history. It tells you that you need to engage with people around you. But also, quite frankly, it seems hard, but it's not. Look, for me, you know what hard is? Sending a machine to Mars and getting pictures back almost in real time. That's hard. To me, a vaccine that helps to kill a deadly virus, that's hard. To me, having to work 2, 3, 4 jobs to take care of your family, that's hard. Someone saying something that's sexist when I'm in the workplace with a Tamala Edwards, it's not hard for me to go, what did you just say? Did you realize what you just said? That was offensive to me. That's just me. I'm just saying it. Maybe you didn't realize what you were saying, but maybe you should watch your mouth. Okay, thank you. That's not so hard. To say, wait a minute, we don't use that kind of language here. We respect all people here. Maybe you just, in this moment, you just didn't realize what was happening or what you're doing, or maybe you've been doing it for a long time. I'm not sure, but nowadays that doesn't fly. You can't do that. So I would just respectfully ask you to not say that or not do what you're doing right now because it's offensive. Okay, thank you. With a smile.
Always with a smile.
Always with a smile. Because then what is someone going to do?
Don, you lived in Philly. It's Philly. It can get heated.
In the workplace. And then if they, again, fair warning, I've warned you. And then the next time you go to HR. That's what you can do if it happens in your workplace. Now, what I did the other day, just, I'm in the gym. I have my mask on. The guy next to me didn't. He had his mask down. And I said, hey, man, how are you? Good to see you, whatever. Do you mind putting your mask on? He's like, oh, no, I'm sorry. I didn't even realize. It's okay. But you don't have to say, put on your mask or, say, do you mind? Oh, it's something nice. Yeah, it's a great day. Do you mind doing me a favor? I have an underlying condition, or my child is in an underlying condition, and I'm trying to,
be safe.
make sure I'm be safe. So do you mind putting your mask on? Thank you. Easy. Now they can say no. And then you just go to the management and say, there's a guy in there who won't put his mask on. Do you mind? And the other day I was out at a restaurant for the first time, and there was someone on the sidewalk right near smoking a cigar. And they said, is everything okay? And I said, everything is great except for the cigars. And he said, I'll take care of it. And he said, sir, can you? And he went over and the guy said, do you mind? He goes, this is, can we put you somewhere in a more private area because this is a smoke-free zone? Simple as that. And you don't always want to go from 0 to 100 in these situations. You do it with a smile and you don't have to fight. If someone here's the thing, if someone gets nasty with you, you don't have to engage with that. You can just walk away. I'm not saying people should fight, but you can just walk away. You don't have to be like, F you, I dare you. You don't have to do that. You just remain calm. Keep calm and carry on.
As your mother and my mother would say, it's not what you say, it's how you say it. Just make sure you say it.
Just make sure. Exactly, Tam.
Somebody says, can you tell me, we're down to the last couple of questions. Can you tell me more about the influence James Baldwin has had on your life and work based on what you know of him? What story would he be writing today?
I think today he would be writing about, he would certainly be writing about the people who are not saying anything, about the people who make excuses for bigotry and racism and discrimination and voter suppression. We would definitely be writing about that and holding up a mirror to the country about who they are, and with a fire that I'm not sure many people in the society are capable of. So I know that he would be doing that, but I think he would also be fighting for voter laws, for John Lewis's voting rights law, the Voting Rights Act. I think he would be fighting for that, and I think he would be trying to get us to become more engaged in politics, because you can't, if you can't change people's behavior, you can certainly change the laws, which will change their behavior because they'll have to do it. You can tell people all day long, you cannot drive 50 here. It's a 30-mile-an-hour zone. Until you have a thing that says 30 miles an hour, until someone gets out there and enforces that 30-mile-an-hour zone, you're gonna have people flying by going whatever they want. Same thing with racism. Same thing.
You know, you say this book is to Trishad, your grandnephew,
Right.
but in the end, I felt like the book really was to Lisa, your sister.
Yeah.
And I wondered if that really your sister who you lost over the last few years, if really this was your way of really trying to tell her everything that you've learned and everything that you're thinking.
Yeah, I mean, it was, man, that still breaks my heart today. I don't feel whole. And, I don't express it a lot because I don't like to talk about my feelings that much. Yes, but the book was really dedicated to her because my sister was a firebrand. My sister was, Angela Davis, Black Power, taught me to, made me listen to Gil Scott-Heron, and, Black Power speeches. She was a rabble rouser, and she helped to raise, and I talk about that she helped to raise a generation of people that were much more politically engaged and had much more of a resolve to solve this thing than maybe my family's generation, the one who was, so hell-bent on us getting an education, but wanted us to be sort of this peaceful, nonviolent type. My sister was like, by any means necessary, Malcolm X. And so when I say this is the fire, this is from my sister saying, I think her spirit was helping me to write this. I think James Baldwin, I know it's weird, I think he was talking to me, but I know my sister was as well. And I will tell you, this is where I haven't told this story. You got some breaking news and you got some good stuff here. In the process of writing this book, I had a friend call me and say, I have someone you need to talk to. And it was one of those sort of mediums that you've seen on television.
Right.
And I was like, come on, no. And then I had an ex-girlfriend call and say the same thing. Like, have you ever thought about? And I'm like, no. And then they both set me up with the same person. And yeah, I learned a lot about. Now, look, I don't know if it's true or not, but as the person was telling me throughout this process, and I was writing it down, I had tears in my eyes the entire time. And some of it showed up in this book, not in the way of, that one would think, but just the freedom and the autonomy and the self-possession in this book. It came out, and I think that's all my sister.
I'm going to end on one line from the book that I think, if I had to pick a line that summed it all up, this is it. Both the work that's in front of us and the hope that hopefully we have as we go into it. Progress is John Lewis standing on the Edmund Pettus Bridge. Healing is you and me standing on the John Lewis Bridge.
Yep.
Don, it has been a wonderful hour. I know you got to go get ready so you can light them up on CNN tonight. But thank you for spending this hour with us in Philadelphia.
Thank you. And let me just say this. I'm in a positive place. And the reason I have him here is because we all need to love each other and get closer to our families and our loved ones. And this is what keeps me, when I come home at night from all the craziness and I have to go light them up, as you say, it's having my family here with me, because this is all love. So just love each other. That's all I have to say. And it's so good. Thank you so much for doing this. And you look amazing. You don't age ever.
Oh, well, thank you. We will take that. And same for you. Same for you. All the best, my friend.
Thank you very much. This is the fire.
Right. And thank you to everybody who joined us here with the Free Library.
Thanks.